Ustadh, Alim, Shaykh, these are terms that we often hear. What's the difference between these terms, if any? Let's look at these terms linguistically first. Ustadh means teacher. So if somebody is a teacher, they are known as an Ustadh. A Shaykh, linguistically, has two different meanings to it. One of them is an old man, and that's a phrase Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually uses in the Quran. He's a Shaykh, i.e. he's an old man. Shaykh can also mean somebody of a high status, i.e. a person of knowledge. An Alim comes from ilm, and if we were to translate it, really what we're saying is this person's a scholar. That's basically what we're saying, a person who has a lot of knowledge, i.e. he is a scholar. Now, all because somebody puts one of these terms in front of their name doesn't necessarily mean that they're any one of those things. And all because he puts his name in front of one of these terms in front of his name doesn't mean he is that and he's not another one. Ultimately, in that case, okay, so how do I know as a layman kind of who to ask my questions, or who is somebody who is deserving of asking a question? It's a difficult question to answer, but let's start at some places. Let's take, for example, a doctor. If I've got a health problem, how do I know who to ask? Well, the first thing to start off with is if somebody is a graduate in medicine, that's probably a good start. And likewise, when we're talking about knowledge, if somebody is a graduate of a seminary, that's normally a good start. So for example, if they've gone to, and it could be any seminary, and there are different types of seminaries. So there could be Medina University, it could be Azhar, it could be Dar al-Ulum, it could be, there's so many different seminaries, and they all have their pros and cons. But a first step would be if this person is a graduate. Does that mean that everybody who's not a graduate is not going to be a person of knowledge? Not necessarily. And in fact, you could have some people who are great scholars who have never gone through an official seminary and graduated from that seminary. But it's not, in today's day and time, especially in the Western world, it's not the norm, but it can definitely happen. Somebody who's done a lot of traditional private study and they've taken that to a really high level and they're not a graduate of seminary can absolutely happen. But really, these are the two kind of avenues that we're looking at in terms of someone who's done loads of study or somebody who's a graduate of a seminary. Okay. Is every single graduate of a seminary, are they now an alim? Are they now a scholar? Let's take the doctor example. Is every single person who graduates from medicine, are they now a scholar of medicine? The answer is, of course not. What does a scholar mean? A scholar means somebody who is well-versed, somebody who is a reference point. If you've just graduated from medicine, for sure, compared to the average person, you're going to know a lot, for sure. Are you a scholar of medicine, though? Not necessarily, not necessarily. And that's an important distinction for us to understand as well, that not every single graduate is at the same level. And ultimately, it's actually your studies that happens after you graduate from a seminary that is going to distinguish what kind of a level of knowledge that you have. What is all the extra stuff that you've done outside of your graduating from your seminary that's going to determine that. For the average layman, it's very difficult to be able to distinguish. Just like in terms of a doctor, I mean, I've got two GPs. I mean, they're both GPs in my head. When you're in the field, you might be able to differentiate and say, well, this guy has actually done a lot of extra stuff. This guy actually really knows what he's talking about. Somebody who's outside of the field, well, they're all doctors to me. There's another thing for us to understand as well. Similarly, when it comes to doctors, are all doctors the same? No. You have some doctors who specialize in surgery, some doctors who might specialize in dermatology, some doctors who specialize in different things. Likewise, when it comes to graduates of Islamic studies seminaries, you have some scholars who might specialize in fiqh and halal and haram. You'll have some scholars who might specialize in tafsir. You might have some scholars who specialize in hadith, and so on and so forth. Now, you might not necessarily be able to understand that or grasp that because you're not in the field, but it's one thing for you to be conscious of. Why is it important? Because sometimes we might ask a question to somebody and we don't actually realize that actually the person that we're asking might not be the best person for this. Your local imam might not be the right person to be asking for a certain amount of your questions. Okay, so what do I have to do then as an individual? How do I differentiate between all these different things that are happening? Well, it's actually going to be very much context-based. And it might actually be based upon what resources that you have to your available vicinity. Ultimately, the command that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put upon you is فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. People of knowledge don't necessarily dress in a certain way. If somebody just has a shimagh, just has a nice thing that they have on their head, that doesn't mean that he's a shaykh. Somebody could be a huge scholar and they wear a shirt and a tie. It has nothing to do with your dress code. Now, we mentioned some things previously in terms of how one might be able to at least start that in terms of seeing who are graduates of seminaries. And ultimately, the people who are going to be able to differentiate in terms of who are the highest class people or the most deserving people to be asking in that locality are people who are going to be graduates. So maybe we should ask them. Similarly, just like how a doctor, if you was to ask a doctor and he was to tell you the best knee surgeon in our locality is this guy, that's actually quite important. Whereas if you ask your next door neighbor, that doesn't really mean anything. So asking other graduates in terms of, I have this issue or I have this question, who is the most deserving person for me to be taking this question to? Very similar type of thing. So we should be looking for graduates who are giving us advice in terms of where to be taking our questions. It's not all just about ilm as well. It's also about when we're seeking a person to be asking a question, also about how they conduct themselves. Because ultimately, the difference between studying Islam and Islamic sciences and studying medicine is, studying Islam is supposed to actually reform a person. So what is this person's conduct like? Are there people who are swearing all the time? Are there people who are lying? Are there people who their conduct is showing in a way? If that is the case, even if they're a graduate, even if they're a PhD graduate, there's alarm bells there. There's serious alarm bells there. Another thing to realize, if you're asking somebody a question and they frequently say, I don't know, then that's an amazing person. Because now what that means is that person has understood where his boundaries are, and he's understood that he's got limitations, and he's not embarrassed or afraid to use that. And Imam Malik has a very famous story when he was asked loads of questions, and he kept saying, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. It's actually the sign of ilm when somebody says, I don't know, and they frequent that. So if you found somebody, when you're asking him questions, he says, I don't know, that's a good person to keep hold on to. And maybe you can say, well, can you direct me to somebody who might know? Hopefully, these are some general kind of ideas for us to understand where to ask our questions to and how to navigate these different questions. One thing that we shouldn't necessarily do, just like if you're ill, don't just Google it and take the answer. Rather, try and use the resources in your community, ask the people and find out who are the best surgeons, who are the best people in dermatology, who are the best people for me in my locality to be asking these kind of questions to, and Allah knows best.